Dave Arnold, your host of Cooking Issues, coming to you live from the heart of Manhattan, Rockefeller Center, New York City, Newsstand Studios. Just you and me today in the studio, Joe Hazen, rocking the panels.
Hey, yeah, it's quiet in here.
Yeah, I know. We went from being like full house like twice in a row to being, Empty. Well, John, who's normally with us, John Nehul, is getting ready for his friends and family at Temperance, the relaunch of the new Temperance menu. No longer Temperance Wine Bar, just Temperance. And his Belgian-themed menu, so he could not be here today, unfortunately. Quinn, I think, might call in a little bit later. Not sure. But we are fortunate enough, although he's not going to say too much because of his scratchy throat. Making America sick again, Jackie Molecules. How you doing?
Yo, I've been better.
Also, you can't take somebody's joke, Dave.
It's Jack said it, and I'm saying it for him because he can't talk right now. That's Jack's quote, man. Awful. Jeez. And by the way, I believe there's an entire industry based on taking people's jokes. I believe it's called comedy. Anyway, Nastasia the Hammer Lopez, how you doing? Also in Los Angeles. How you doing?
Fine. You want to get the shit, so you want to get the stuff out of the way?
Well, there's a lot of stuff to get out of the way. Which particular? How about this one, folks? Guess what? There is a brand new shipment of Spinzall 2.0. That's right, brand new fresh shipment of Spinzall 2.0 sitting on a dock somewhere near the city of Boston. But guess what's going on with dock workers? There's a strike. There's a strike. So ain't nothing moving anywhere. And you know what? Even though it's already on the shore, the longshoremen have already taken the box off of the boat and put it on the shore. Guess who doesn't cross a picket line? The Teamsters. And so we cannot get a truck to go get those Spinzalls, even though everyone swore on a stack of Bibles that those things would be off the wharf by the 21st of September. Guess who got hosed? Not just Booker and Dax, although we got hosed pretty badly. And Monitor's Pantry, anyone who's ordered a Spinzall. But it's going to be available as soon as the strike is over. Is that accurate, Stas, or what?
Yeah. I'm happy that all those big companies aren't going to get their stuff by Black Friday, but they should let the small companies grab their stuff.
There's no way to know. It's just a big pile of boxes.
Oh, I know.
Remember, the system is built to screw the small person. What's up? We got someone on the phone? Is it our favorite? Is it our favorite calling in?
Am I your favorite?
You are a favorite. You're not who I thought you were going to call in later in the show. We got Quinn from the upper left. What's up? How you feeling?
I'm actually feeling better.
Oh, that's great. Good to hear. Hey, which one of you, by the way, is standing in traffic right now trying to get hit? Is it Nastasia because of how bad you feel?
That's me. Sorry,
No.
on mute.
Oh, Ariel's there. Ariel got on the phone.
Hi, I'm here.
Ariel
I've just
Johnson.
been
Great friend of the show.
in the background.
Ariel, I had you call in. So we're going to get right to you because I know you can't stay for the whole. By the way, Ariel Johnson, author of A Flavorama. What's the slug line on that one again?
Oh, a guide to unlocking the art and science of flavor.
A guide to unlocking the art of science. Wait, no. A guide. Say it again.
A guide to unlocking the art and science of flavor.
There you go. Flavorama. Anyway, you should go buy it. When I was in freaking Korea, I found a copy of it in a bookstore in Seoul and sent Ariel a picture of it in Korea. It's pretty sweet.
It was very cool. It's actually soon being translated to be sold in Korea.
Wait, oh, really? That's nice. I'm not in Korean yet, although I have an offer for someone to translate it, but I'm thinking I want to wait until maybe I finish the redo before we do any more new translations, you know what I mean?
Sounds wise. Yeah, good choice.
Yeah. Have you been over to Korea?
I haven't been since before the pandemic, but I love Korea. Love Seoul.
Yeah, I only went there once. Good place, good times. All right, so listen, we're going to not do things normal. We're not going to shoot the breeze because I have Ariel here. I have specific questions. Although, Ariel, since I don't have you forever, anything over the past week you've done in the food and or beverage space that you think is interesting for us to hear about?
Oh, well, last week, actually, I was visiting Tabasco.
Oh, yeah?
On their island, in Avery Island, Louisiana, which is completely amazing.
Do they have an interactive exhibit where you get to go in and bribe judges?
I didn't see that, but I did get kind of a behind the scenes look, which was very cool.
How much does it stink like vinegar on that island?
Only in like a couple of warehouses. It's actually not that bad. It's a pretty pleasant smell. I mean, I like fermentation smells to a point.
Yeah.
So yeah.
By the way, just to give some context to what I said before, I'm a fan of Tabasco, and the product, but back in the day they were famously corrupt and paid off a bunch of. I mean, as if it's difficult to pay off. Judicial people in Louisiana, they paid off a bunch of people so that they can enforce a copyright claim on the word Tabasco, which, as we all know, is a pepper. It would be like saying, no, I have the trademark for automobile. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense. But whatever. I digress. At least that was the story back in the early 90s as people used to tell it. Am I wrong about this, Ariel? Do you have different information on that?
Oh, I have no information on that. So, TBD.
But my wife, who spent, her junior high years, so, some of elementary school and junior high just outside of New Orleans and Natchitoches, growing up, says that everybody loves the Avery Island tour for the Tabasco people. It's like something everybody does, and it's awesome. So I would like to go on it someday, although I probably just alienated anyone there if they've ever heard this. So, yeah. Stas is like, who cares? I'm a Cholula girl anyway, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
All right. So you also recommend going on the tour, Ariel?
Oh yeah, no, it was amazing.
How far away is it from New Orleans?
A few hours drive. I flew into Lafayette, so I have no first-hand experience getting there from New Orleans.
Do you know I've never been anywhere in Louisiana except for New Orleans? I would like to go to Natchitoches, and I would love to go to Lake Charles because I like Zydeco. Anyway, on to the food-related questions. So, first of all, we had a question on, do you enjoy the conversation that takes place around the word fermentation as it's loosely applied to things that may or may not be fermented in the way that you think of them? Like, for instance, do you like to think of fermentation as the entire realm of things, including just like enzymatic-based things, or do you like only when it refers to fundamentally lacto-fermented and or yeast-fermented things? What's your feeling on this, on the loose use of the word fermentation?
I mean, I think I generally use it to mean things transforming ingredients with microbes. So, technically, acetic fermentation to make vinegar is not fermentation because it is an aerobic process, and by the strict biochemical definition, fermentation is an anaerobic process. I think once you get outside the realm of microorganisms, you're getting into definitely fermentation sort of adjacent techniques. Things look like a similar approach to them, but I don't call them fermentation because there's no microbial transformation involved.
Right, but also you don't care that much is what you're saying.
It's not the biggest thing that keeps me up at night.
Right, but my issue is, okay, so then the other problem I have is this, right? There's all these people who are like, but there's some microbial, so there's a lot of multimodal long-term food changes where there is some fermentation, but the majority of it might be enzymatic breakdown due to enzymes already present in the food, yada, 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 right? So there's a lot of non-clear lines. There's a lot of gray area that people like to yap about, but I mean, don't you think it's better to people to think about what primarily is going on so that they can, put things in the right buckets, right? So that they can think about things in the right buckets.
If you're holding something in a relatively warm, non-refrigerated temperature for a long time, there's almost certainly going to be some microbial activity. But I think just in terms of not for the sake of getting one over on someone, but thinking functionally about what you're actually doing, so that you can maybe improve what you're doing or make it go a certain way. It is better to focus on what the primary vector of action is, and often that is not actually fermentation. It is enzymes or chemistry.
Do you remember that Vector is the villain in the original Despicable Me?
I haven't actually seen that movie.
Oh, that's a mistake on your part.
But,
it's a decent movie.
But that's cool.
So
I'll add it to my queue.
Yeah. So with that in mind, so that huge preamble is because we're going to talk about umeboshi. And I'll also preface it because I don't know how often you read the umeboshi literature, but I just looked up today on the way over here that there was a study that there's a huge difference in microbial activity between about 9 and 10% salt and like 15 and 20% salt. Like, so the two regimes in which different people do different styles of umeboshi, ume fruit, salt preserved ume fruit. And the study, I'm just going to tell you this, found that at the lower salt regime, that bacteria grew a little bit and then declined a little bit, but basically stayed kind of where they were in the 10 to the fourth column forming bacteria per gram or whatever it is, in that range, 10 to the fourth, 10 to the fifth. Whereas in the higher range, they dropped like a stone down to 30 bacteria. So just that as a preamble to this question that I'm going to read and then let you answer. The standard method for making, this is from Nick. The standard method for making umeboshi or any fruit boshi is to pack the fruit with 20% salt by weight. This is Nick's words, not mine. This seems to be the traditional Japanese method, but is also the method I followed after I saw Rich Shee's post on the ourcookquest.com blog. And by the way, if you're interested in things like this, you should really join Rich Shee's new Substack, flavor-freaks.net. That's flavor-freaks.net. The method works great and produces a great result. My question is, what is going on here fermentation-wise? The product doesn't taste like a lacto-fermented product. It's much more tart. I've heard about high citric acid content in traditional umeboshi, but that's all just concentrated from the original citric acid in the unripe fruit, or is there actual citric acid production as fermentation byproduct? Shouldn't 20% kill most lactobacilli? Is there some other fermentation pathway producing citric acid or other compounds, and does the high salt encourage these or other halophile bacteria over lactobacilli? There you go.
Well, okay, you've brought up, and this is a tangent, but I know how much you love tangents, one thing that is a pet peeve of mine, which is that people say lactobacilli or lactobacillus when they mean lactic acid bacteria, and there are many other genera besides lactobacillus in lactic acid bacteria. So that is something I believe important. But,
what's your favorite one that's not that? Is it Leuconostoc one? Is there one, right?
Leuconostoc mesenterioides.
Oh, that's such a good word. Can you say that one more time?
I'm probably mispronouncing it. Leuconostoc mesenterioides.
I love it.
There's like Pediococcus, a whole genus there.
Don't like that word.
Most
Don't
of
like
them
that
are
word.
in the family Lactobacilliaceae, but that's different from lactobacillus. And I know it's like confusing, but I do think it's important.
Hey man, we all gotta have our twigs to whittle on, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are halotolerant lactic acid bacteria. I think Tetragenococcus is one genus of them. So yeah, I wouldn't go by sourness level or tartness to try to guess whether it's citric acid or lactic acid, because lactic acid can actually be quite tart, and there are citric acid isn't actually microbially stable, so there are lactic acid bacteria that can ferment citric acid into lactic acid. Yeah, I mean there are also like different salt levels of umeboshi. Like in the grocery store in Japan, you can buy different like labeled salt levels, which go below 20.
I would guess 20% is not a lot of bacterial hoo-ha's happening there at all.
Well, I don't know. I mean, like soy sauce fermentations are often at around 20% salt, and you get plenty of like Tetragenococcus as well as salt-tolerant yeasts like Zygosaccharomyces reuxii, which contributes some of the like caramel flavor to soy sauce. So,
but in umeboshi in particular, aren't they also said to be antimicrobial because of like the crazy polyphenols and stuff they have in them?
And plums?
Yeah, I've read like all these studies are like the antimicrobial like phenolic garbage in ume. If you read like I mean, it's probably could be garbage. I don't know. Could be garbage. I don't know.
I mean, well, like lots of things are antimicrobial, but like antimicrobial to whom?
Right. But I mean in a way that like, rowan fruit is like full of like preservatives. It's natural preserve. I don't know. Not an expert. I don't know. Just asking.
No, valid question. No, I mean, I would, obviously people who've actually measured the bacterial species and these things know better than I do, but I wouldn't rule out some very halotolerant strains getting some action, because there are very halotolerant strains of lactic acid bacteria.
And I wonder how it makes a difference, how much liquid is present, right? Or do you think it doesn't? In terms of this, do you think there's enough liquid present?
It's not just salt percentage; it's also water activity. So if you're adding 20% salt by weight of the plums, how much of that weight is water and how much is not water?
Yeah.
So you get actually at 20% salt, because different water activities depending on the composition of the fruit.
I also read that brine fermented versus dry-ish fermented ume, the citric acid content difference might be due to the fact that citric acid is just leached into the brine.
Yeah, definitely possible. A lot of them are, there's a lot of different techniques in terms of draining off the brine or reducing it or using it as umesu or adding it back in.
Yeah. Putting it into cocktails. That's what I do with it.
It's delicious.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you get bent when people call that vinegar?
I think it's called umesu in Japan. So, and su means vinegar. So, I don't know. It's like one of these things where it's it's communication is about getting a point across. So, if you understand what I'm talking about, then we communicate it.
Except for calling it vinegar implies a certain volatile acidity that's not present. So it might give someone the wrong impression if they're actually thinking about what vinegar does.
This is true, yeah. And it's, generally saltier than a typical vinegar. Although they're all salty seasoned vinegars that you can get. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, okay. Now, I have a couple of oil-related questions, one of which is about the kind of Noma, and you were called out specifically, which is why, in addition to the ume, I was going to call you in here. Davis writes in, I've been working on...
Fantastic.
Yeah, I've been working on infusing olive oil with wood, like cedar at the moment. And, the various cedars. There's various cedars, Davis. And oak moss, and would love to use some more delicate finishing oils while maintaining their flavor. Noma/Ariel's wood oil recipe calls for a 6 to 8 hour infusion at 175 degrees Fahrenheit, which killed some of the lighter notes. When working on recipes that benefit from heat, what guidelines should I follow to help maintain oil quality? Can I reduce the temperature? Would an oxygen-free vessel help? Should I revert to sonication? I'm going to throw in a separate one that's not mentioned here. What about doing a small amount of neutral to kind of kick off the reaction, and then a longer steep in at lower temperature?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about extraction, then things that we increase temperature for, temperature, it's really like a matrix between temperature, surface area, and time. If we're just talking about the kinetics of extraction, so how long it takes to extract things. So yeah, no, if you don't want to heat up to 175, you can definitely do it at a cooler temperature. I mean, I think the rule of thumb generally for chemistry is that for every 10 degrees Celsius you change, the reaction rates, although you're not really doing a reaction, but let's use that as a rule of thumb, go up or down by a factor of 2. So if you reduce the temperature 10 degrees Celsius, it will take roughly twice as long.
Right. I mean, the question though is there so for things that have a steady reaction rate, yeah, or for diffusion, yeah, or things that are catalyzed, yeah. But what about things where there's a very sharp activation energy for it to happen, and you need to kind of get over that hump? You know what I mean? Then it could be orders of magnitude different. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. What I'm meaning is that if you're in the active range of the reaction, but then things the Maillard reaction we like to talk about is only happening above the boiling point of water. But if you've ever fermented miso in a warm room, or in some cases left white wine around for too long, then you will definitely find that the Maillard reaction happens and turn things brown over a course of weeks or months, as opposed to minutes or hours.
You've also then made 2 mistakes if you've left it around too long, right? Not just the Maillard. Anyway.
Exactly.
But what do you think about the idea of trying to kickstart the reaction if there is some sort of reaction / precursor garbage, or getting the infusion kicked off at a higher temperature? Because there's also, I know, in a lot of vegetable-based situations, you have to do a certain amount of like rupturing and or damage to the substrate before you get decent kind of extraction or change of the molecules in there. Do you think there's any of that in the wood, or is the wood, you think, just wood and you're just literally doing a T-steep?
Yeah, no, I think as thinking about it more as tea than as something where you're getting a lot of like chemical changes is going to be the most fruitful approach.
What do you think about?
So yeah, no, I think
What do you think about like sanding it, turning it into a sawdust?
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be hard to filter, but definitely making the particle sizes smaller and also like moving the whole mixture as you are infusing is both going to speed up the rate at which like oil molecules and flavor molecules diffuse around each other.
And have you ever looked?
Also,
What?
What is the general ratio of the solids to the oil? Because again, if you start with the neutral oil at the usual temperature, could you just like jack up the ratio of solids and then blend after?
I don't think it's going to make as much of a difference starting small and then adding more. If anything, just following a like traditional perfumery extraction approach, you're basically doing enfleurage, which is has the word flour in it. Typically, you see it in a place like Grasse in France with like deodorized pork lard or more modern solvents.
Deodorized
keeping
pork
flour
lard.
petals. Yeah, exactly. Keeping flour petals in contact with the fat. In that case, you actually change out the flour petals to the same fat. So you'll like start infusing with a certain amount of oleaginous material and flower petals, and then when the flower petals have spent their aroma, you'll pick them out and then put a fresh batch in. So the any amount of oil that you start with can kind of take more flavor generally than like an equal mass of aromatic material has to offer.
I had a related question while the siren's passing you by. I was wondering if you could do like how effective a reverse like a liquor wash would be, where you make an extremely strong decoction of wood in a vacuum bag for a long period of time into very high proof ethanol, and then stir it with oil to flip the flavor back into the oil.
Yeah, no, definitely. Most of these things are more soluble in oil than they are in alcohol. I guess the reason why you do a fat wash first and then alcohol is to kind of like filter out any, like tannins and things like that. If you don't want those like astringent flavors, but if you're ending up in oil anyway, it shouldn't make too much of a difference.
Yeah, I was thinking you could even probably like literally evaporate off the high proof. You know what I mean? And like essentially concentrate it. You know what I'm saying? So you get my point. So it's like you can almost like concentrate it beyond its saturation point into the oil off of high proof ethanol. As long as your oil, you'd have to agitate it because the oil is going to, I believe, float on top of the ethanol. I believe oil is lighter still than ethanol is, so it might be difficult to actually get it to evaporate unless you did some gentle agitation. But I don't know. I was thinking about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, well, so the thing is, if you get like a very pure alcohol, so like not, in the range of vodka, in the range of Everclear, and then like mix with plant material and then distill under vacuum, you're not in the realm of like typical liquor distillation where like the separation is mostly being driven by like the repulsion between water molecules and aroma compounds. If you are in a like almost entirely alcohol system, what you'll do is evaporate out the alcohol and then concentrate the like flavor molecules and waxes into like a thick sort of butter substance.
And then add the oil.
Yeah, dissolve it in however much oil you want. It'll be so concentrated it'll be like disgusting to eat.
Yeah, baby. Yeah. And
exactly.
Sell it. The last thing is that what do you think? Have you done any research on what the actual temperature is where the aroma of things like olive oil start to degrade or change?
I think like 40 to 50 Celsius but I would have to. I've actually ran that and on the GCMS years and years ago, but I'd have to look it up to
but
tell you.
It's low as hell. That's low as hell. That let me translate that.
It's very low.
Yeah,
it's very low.
Yeah, okay. To translate for people, that's real low. That's low. That's low. That's around the temperature that Midnight Oil says the Western Desert lives and breathes at. Okay? You know what I mean? The time has come. Anyway, so Davis also wants to know about experimenting, about using vitamin oil to increase the shelf life of citrus extracts and oil. What do you think about adding, preserving oil? Any good ideas on preserving oil?
Really, the basic things are keep it away from oxygen and keep it away from light.
You don't think doping it with E is
right, like vitamin E or vitamin C or something like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the E is going to mean the E is the most fat soluble of them, right? Like that's the...
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what plants do, you know?
Yeah, that's what plants do.
To themselves.
Yeah. One more oil. We were supposed to deal with this when Captain Greasy was on last week, but do you have any advice other than what we do for infusing chili into fancy oil so that you maintain the aroma? Nastasia and I used to just blend a buttload of it with at low without heating it at all. Just use a crap ton of it and then spin it out in a centrifuge. But I know most people heat it. Do you have any other advice other than those two techniques?
Besides centrifuging and heating it up really high?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what are the flavor differences that you find when you do those two?
Well, I mean, we just use Nastasia and I used to use really nice oil, and then it would still taste like really nice oil, just also like the chili peppers that we used. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't heated at all. I mean, you want to do minimal blending. If I was going to do it again today, I would nitro freeze I would pulverize the peppers to a powder, right, before I started. Even finer than gochu powder, or finer than the Urfa Bieber stuff that you get, powder. Then put it into the oil, and it would infuse relatively quickly. I think even if you didn't suck a vacuum on it, it would infuse relatively quickly. You might hit it with a blender for a little while. I know some olive oils are damaged by blending, especially when you're making emulsions and whipping oxygen into them. But and then we would just spin it out, and it tasted fresh. Remember how fresh that stuff tasted, Stas?
Yeah.
It was real good.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a really high surface area, you might not even need to pull a vacuum on it as much. Since when you're pulling a vacuum, you're kind of trying to force it into solid tissue and then out, or voids in the solid tissue and out. And if it's finely pulverized, then there's much more surface area to play with.
Yeah. I mean, if I was going to do it, I would probably suck a vacuum on a little bit of it just to wet it, right? Because the issue is in a lot of powder, there's a lot of just trapped air on the surface of everything, and the oil has to make it past that trapped air to get to the pepper. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And in that case, to overcoming the kind of thermodynamics of wetting, yeah, it definitely makes sense to pull a vacuum. I mean, it might make sense to heat briefly to 60 Celsius just to deactivate any enzymatic activity. But I don't necessarily think going far beyond that would add much.
So what about the idea then of going back to what I said before is taking a tiny amount of neutral oil just to wet the stuff, and then you could heat it to do whatever you were saying, and then putting your good oil into it. The vast majority of it being the good oil.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Two things are happening when you heat up oil. In terms of degrading the flavor. The one thing is that you are evaporating away the nice smells. The other thing is you are actually degrading the fat into nasty-smelling molecules. So with neutral oil, you avoid evaporating away smells because there aren't any to begin with, but there is no avoiding the degradation of the oil into...
Right, but I mean, that's not going to be...
efficient-smelling compounds.
That's not going to be a giant issue at lower temperatures, right? Reasonable temperatures, in a bag.
I mean, what does reasonable mean to you?
Well, in a bag, not on a stovetop, below the boiling point of water.
Yeah, but you can get thermal oxidation below the boiling point of water.
Like, what?
I mean, maybe if you used a like completely saturated fat, which is much less likely to degrade into like nasty aldehydes.
My next band, Nasty Aldehydes. All right. So what do you think? Covered and smothered?
Sorry, I can stay on. I just have to get in a taxi. So give me 5 minutes.
All right, cool. All right, awesome. So we'll go to other people's blah blahs of the week and see what's it. What do Jack? Are you up to talking at all, or Quinn? You up to talking? Stas, what do you guys got for this week?
I can talk.
All right, what do you got?
I've been making some gelatos still, but I haven't tasted all of them. One of them that I did taste that was really nice is my family picked some fresh hazelnuts. So some of them are still like green. So we did a green hazelnut gelato. It's pretty good.
What does an unripe hazelnut taste like? Is it like is it milky?
I would say it's almost like a water chestnut.
You just lost. So many people hate water chestnuts. Here's a list. My wife hates them. Somebody else in my family hates them, and I think one of us hates them, but I don't know who it is. I like them.
Well, the texture, like when you actually eat one, the texture is like that, but they do have that like slightly milky, astringent, hazelnut flavor. It's a little different.
And how much of that translates to being blended and turned into a frozen dessert?
Really well, actually.
What do you say?
Like it definitely doesn't taste like regular hazelnut.
No, we'll have to try it someday. I never had a, McGee's immature pistachios have that mango hit. His fancy Turkish immature pistachios. Those were delicious. Remember those, Nastasia?
Yeah.
Those were good. Those were good.
I actually ran those on the GCMS for him, and they're full of delicious aldehydes.
Yeah.
Sorry, not aldehydes, terpenoids.
And it's because they're so you think it's random, or is it because they're all anacardiaceae like related thingamajigs?
I mean, my guess is because they are related. But like California pistachios were like had much less of this like herbaceous fruity family of molecules and a lot more just like pyrazines, which taste nutty.
Yeah. Once again, could they grow the other ones in California? It's just the varieties that we grow to be kind of like, industrial juggernauts don't have it, or do you think it's an actual terroir phenomenon?
I would imagine it's more to do with variety and with handling than with like terroir on the same variety.
Yeah, like could we grow like an almond that has high in oil content? Could we grow like a really awesome like high fat almond if we wanted to?
Probably.
No.
I mean, I think maybe there's just not an industrial market for it, which is why they don't. Although, like, what do they get almond oil from?
I don't
know. What variety? I don't know.
Well, I guess they use the rest for almond flour. I mean, it's probably a no-way situation, right? But I mean, and I'm sure the vast majority of people who are buying almonds want a relatively quote-unquote dry, i.e. non-oily almond, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you ever had like really old almonds that have completely oxidized, or I have, and at that point I would tend to agree.
Yeah.
If you're not going to handle it
are
very
you throwing serious shade and you're saying the average American is eating rancid nuts and therefore the least amount of oil in the nut is the best because it's going to taste the least rancid? Is that what you just said?
My particular sense memory is of getting traveling in an airport and getting a container of instant oatmeal that had sliced almond topping and it tasting like paint and ruining my day. So
yeah.
I don't know about most, but definitely, I mean, it might kind of be like olive oil 10 years ago where most Americans liked something that was like slightly oxidized and slightly fermented. So that was what was available.
How depressing is it when you don't cook with nuts all the time and you have that bag of nuts, excuse me, and you haven't re-vacuum sealed it and it's sitting in your kitchen. You opened it once and you're going to make another dish and you're like, oh, it's fine. It's going to be fine. So you don't buy a new bag of nuts because you have that old bag of nuts and nuts aren't cheap. And then you open it and you're like, it smells like paint. And people, don't put it in the food. Don't. It's going to ruin it. Don't do it. Don't.
And the worst part is I always feel like I should have known better, but I didn't.
Yeah. 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 When you open a new bag of nuts and it smells rancid, take it right back to the store and make them smell it and get your money back. Even though I would never do that. I think you should do that. I will never do it. I will just suck it up and grumble. But I think you should get your money back. But rancid nuts, I think like everyone when they're a kid, their parent should like be like, kid, this is what rancid nuts smell like. Don't do this. You know what I mean? And then that's it. Because you can lock that aroma into your head like that. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess that would assume that most adults can pinpoint what rancidity smells like. Which
No,
I don't think
that's no.
I mean, if only because people use the word rancid to mean like rotten, when rancid is a completely like chemical oxidative process.
Yeah. Hey, you know what's funny is like certain nuts that I think tend to go rancid pretty quickly, like walnuts, like at least in my house. Sometimes like right before they go like rancid bad, there's like a fruity rancidity that kind of like is like, oh, do I like it or not? And then I'm like, no, and I throw it away. What is that?
I'm not sure. I mean, there are so like rancidity is coming from fat molecules getting so triglycerides getting broken up either by oxygen, free radicals from ultraviolet light, or like, temperature, and popping off the glycerol head of the triglyceride molecules when you get a fatty acid. Then the like oxidative process is converting that into a molecule called an aldehyde, which has a long tail like a fatty acid with a slightly different head. So like aldehydes can vary a lot in what they taste like. Generally the like 9 carbon aldehydes I feel like are the most like oxidized painty. But then something like decanal, which has 10 carbons, is actually in orange peel and tastes like orange. So it's definitely possible that that's one of the ones you're generating early on, and that smells nicer than the other one.
Especially black walnuts, which can have a little bit of like a weird fruity aroma note anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. And like that kind of like buttery caramelized fruit flavor.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, maybe before let's get some questions in here. We're going to blast through these. All right, Elliot says, "Hey, Dave said on the previous episode that one should definitely get a flour mill, and it made sense at the particular effect I was aiming at, which was the tortillas made with the Sonoran white wheat, because it required it. But I seem to be saying that one should have one more generally. Yeah, yes." I mean, I love it. I use it constantly. I don't think everyone should have a flour mill, Elliot. I think that if you enjoy milling flour, you should have a flour mill, right? So the question is, how do you know that you're going to enjoy milling flour? That's the hard part. And it's a relatively large investment. However, you can buy the ones that are being sold generally on Pleasant Valley Grains, which is where most people buy their grain mills in the United States, as far as I can tell. Como, Mock Mill, things like that. Those ones tend to not go on sale too often, right? So, and they're not like on eBay that often, not at a great price. But there's a lot of older ones that do come on, and a lot of them work in fairly similar fashion, right? But to really, I think, get the best out of it, you need to invest in kind of a learning curve. So, sifting, not sifting. So I actually don't tell anyone. I ordered 2 more different mills to test different mills out, right? So I'm going to test an impact mill, a home-based impact mill, and then a slower grinder made by Red Cell. One's made by Lee Organics, one's made by Red Cell. So I'll talk more about those mills when they come in. But in general, I'll say this. If you're interested in the flavor of whole wheat, which I am, I have never had a roller milled whole wheat flour that I thought was worth anything at all. I find them all terrible. I've never had one that I liked, ever, right? And so if you've ever had whole wheat flour and been like, I like this if I use 10% of it in a recipe, because otherwise everything tastes terrible and dry and nasty, and then, maybe it's worth, if you're interested in trying to get that kind of flavor from whole wheat that you would actually enjoy, I think it's worth trying to get a flour mill, because that's the way to do it. But I could talk more about it after I review the next two flour mills that come in. Quinn, you like yours, right?
Yeah, and also I would say, if it's available to you, try and find like a small scale local stone mill near you that is grinding relatively fresh, interesting grains. And then obviously, if you like working with those flours in your recipe, then I think that's a clear indicator that you'll like milling fresh flour.
Yeah, I don't buy a lot of other people's, when I say a lot, any of other people's flour, but there are more ways that you could, that we have time to talk about how to. By the way, some people even make sure that you're getting from a good person, because a lot of people now, I was reading, a lot of people just throw grains through stone mills lightly, crack them, and then put them through roller mills so that they can say they've been stone ground. So just make sure you're getting it from an actual person who is stone grinding them. The other thing is that there are, even traditionally, zillions of ways to use stone grinders. So there's single pass, multi-pass, different kinds of sifting that can be done. And so even just saying stone milled, so you have to get a feeling for the type of flour that you're working with. So I like to feel it between my thumb and my pointer finger. I get a good feeling for what the kind of flour is going to feel like. I would recommend, as a start, finding someone who's doing high extraction, meaning they're doing some sifting, right? High extraction, single pass, whole wheat flour. Now, the reason why that's not a number that's going to tell you everything is you need to know what the extraction rate was. And by extraction, I mean 100 grams a week goes in. 100 grams of, well, really not, because you blow off some water, right? Water gets blasted off as you're milling. But let's say 100 grams of flour come out. How much of that flour gets sifted away? So an 85% extraction means that out of 100 grams of flour that's being produced out of the mill, 85 grams of that ends up as flour, and 15 grams of that ends up as bran / some of the germ / some of the flour that's stuck to the bran and whatnot. That's what 85 is. So, but there's different ways to get 85, right? So like if I'm grinding like very coarse, right? It's, there's different ways that 85 can happen. So you need to know the bolt, like what the mesh was. No one tells you this. You need to know what mesh they're putting it through, like what sieve it's going through, what the extraction rate is at that sieve, and that's going to give you a much better idea of kind of what you're dealing with. The other thing is like, depending on what technique they're using, like whole wheat flour, fresh ground for tortillas or for chapati on like an atta grinder is going to be a very different flour than the same flour milled on like large, slower moving stones at a lower temperature. So you really got to get a feel, and this is why having your own mill is so much fun, because you get to control a lot of these variables yourself. But if you call, some of these places are small, and if you call them, they'll tell you all this information because they want you to know as much about their flours as humanly possible, because they're thinking that will make you a customer for life. So I would recommend like talking to them about how they do it, to get a feeling for what someone's flour's like. Does that make any sense? Anyway.
Yeah, I was just saying, for me personally, I really dislike the flavor, probably like you, of commodity whole wheat flour.
I think it's roller milling. I've never had a good one. I'm just saying this. I've never had a good one. Ever. I went out, I bought, I think, 10 different ones, being like, one of these has to be good. Roller milled flour, whole wheat. Not one. Not one. All trash. Filth. 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 More bread crap. Douglas writes in, I recall Dave talking about rapid cooling a loaf of bread in a chamber vac, yielding a great crust in a rapidly cooled loaf. I tried this and ended up with the loaf getting compacted, dense, kind of collapsing on itself. Any ideas? Yeah, the machine was an Innova chamber vac. Loaf had a hydration of about 80% and was a quick bread recipe, so hadn't proofed long. Not sure what contributed to the end failure. So the Innova, I did it once in the Innova, and one of the issues on the Innova is it's very hard to control. Like when I don't think they have a cooling function that does it relatively gently. But I also had a lot of crushing results. You need the bread to cool down to a certain. Okay, hold on. Certain breads are going to have more hot strength than others, right? So like a bread that has like zero hot strength, like rye bread. Rye bread has zero hot strength. This is why you need to let rye breads cool for hours and hours before you slice them, or they completely gummy mess, right? The starch has to
That's
set.
due to like
What?
something like creating glue cans, right?
Yeah, and for some reason the starch just doesn't set up, right? Like the structure of it's
Or it's
different.
like small soluble fibers that are like gooey, even when kind of like an oats. I think it's not exactly the same molecules in rye, but I think there's some similar ones.
Right. They also, but it also doesn't have the same gluten network that is like providing a secondary structure for it, right? So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
all bread needs to set, but if there's a secondary gluten structure there, you can get around slicing it warm. But for any of you that have ever sliced bread warm, you can see that you've ruined the crumb where you sliced it, right? It's ruined. You can see like it doesn't look the same as regular sliced bread if you slice it before it's cooled down, and which is different from heating it up again and slicing it, which is fine anyway. To a degree. Anyway, point being, like certain breads have better hot strength than others. So the drier you've cooked the bread, the more gluten is in the bread, and any cooling time you can give it before you throw it into the vacuum, right? Also, the airier it is, right, the better. So, like, if you have one, if it's more difficult for the air to escape the crumb, right, then it's more going to tend to blow it up. Whereas if it's very easy for the air to escape, if it's like a lot of interconnectivity between the pores inside of the bread, the easier it is for the air to escape, the less likely you are to blow up. But if you do blow it up, then what happens when the air comes back in, wham, it smashes it and it's kind of unpleasant. So I have also, Douglas, had both good and bad luck depending on what the bread is. And ultimately what you would want is something where you could control how fast the vacuum was applied and control how fast the air went back in. But as far as I know, there's no standard commercial machine that has a bread cooling cycle. So, I don't know.
Well, and with bread cooling, you care much more about rapidly evaporating water, thereby like cooling down the whole thing, than expanding like existing air.
No,
right?
it's all about, you don't want to expand it at all. All you want to do is evaporate the water.
Exactly. Right.
And
right.
not only that, but it also makes when it works, like the crust is ridiculous, right? In fact, try this, Douglas. Like let it cool like 50% of the way. Right? So it's like basically set and still just warm. Throw that sucker in the vacuum machine after it's already set but still warm, and you'll vacuum blast the stuff off of the outside of the crust. And it's the equivalent of throwing it back into a 350. So a lot of times I cheat. If I don't like the crust, I wait for it to cool. I throw it back into a 350 oven at high convection for like 10 minutes just to blast the air off the crust again without heating the inside of the bread too much. But you can get some of that effect just by evaporating water in a vacuum machine. So there you go. You might like this one, Ariel. Let's see. Matt from Mystic writes in, are paper towels food safe? I'd never heard someone ask this question before. I use paper towels in my cooking from time to time, wrapping a wet paper towel around vegetables to steam in a microwave, emergency fill-in for coffee filters, and I've always wondered, are paper towels actually food safe? Now, you might have more information, but I'm going to give it an emphatic yes, because otherwise they would have been sued to death. To death.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't think of anything that would make them not food safe. I mean, I guess like bleached paper towels might like have more, I don't know, stuff that over the long term you might not love, but like, I mean, paper towels are so ubiquitous and such a like regulated consumer product. But yeah, I don't think there's.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think you're good, Matt. Owen K writes in, trying to recreate a big night feast. Remember the movie Big Night, people? It's one of my faves. Trying to recreate a big night feast and struggling with the Amaretti cookie paper rocket. So for those of you who don't know, you eat the cookie, you take the wrapper, you roll it into a tube, you stick the tube on a plate, and you light it on fire, and as it burns down, it leaves a little husk. That husk, eventually the convective air forces go, and it lifts into the air, but not with enough fire to light your house on fire. You know what I mean? Yeah. But here, I didn't know that. I think that they have changed the paper. So Owen says, my multiple failed attempts prompted a search which reveals that the wrapping paper won't light as well as it used to. Tea bag paper is a recognized substitute, but if I were to make my own cookies or rewrap them, where could I source optimally flammable paper? I presume that we are Big Night fans. Any ideas? I don't know. I was about to run a test on wax paper, but I don't think there's enough residue in wax paper. Like the old cookie wrappers, I don't know. Any of you guys have any ideas? Any of you guys have a go-to wrapper that you light on fire? I know Nastasia loves anything that you lights on fire and takes off, especially if you can light her neighbor's house on fire. I don't know.
Jesus.
Remember I got you all of those like balloon lanterns, and you were like, go, light thee on fire. Amazing. I love that stuff.
Yes.
But I don't know. Do any of you guys have any cookies of note that you think would light up real good? Or should everyone listening to this try some experiments? Let us know which papers make the best. Please don't burn your house down, okay? But let us know which papers work best. I used to have this happen constantly anyone who's worked in a pro kitchen where the pilot lights are broken has mistakenly. You should keep a torch in your kitchen, not just because the torch should have a Searsall on it, but because it's really not the best idea to light your ovens with rolled up paper towels. But anyone that has lit their ovens with rolled up paper towels know that those things take off like a mother once they burn down like that. You know what I mean?
Fortune cookies probably light up pretty fast.
Are they wrapped in paper still? I've only had the plastic ones now.
No, just at least the fortunes themselves.
Oh. Yeah, but we need them tubed. They need to be tubed. They need to be lightweight paper, and they need to burn down to an almost imperceptible residue. Yeah. You know what would be really cool looking is if you could get a paper that had a light, like reinforcement. Like, you know the way that like kerosene lanterns used to buy the mantles for kerosene lanterns, and they were filled of fabric with little wires in them because they were so fragile, and then you would light them once and the structure would burn off of them and it'd be left with this basically angel fairy like thing. If you could make something that floated away that looked like that, oh my God, that'd be awesome. I like fire though, probably a little too much. But anyway, people, let me know, people. We'll wait to answer that, Owen, until next week. People can let us know whether they have any ideas. Okay. Let me see what we got. Math Man. Gives us a pie question and is worried is trying to troll you, Nastasia, about Pie Marches On. On page 30 of Pie Marches On, Monroe Boston Strauss talks about thickening fruit juices. By the way, that's my pie Bible. For those of you that this is the first time, I don't know, that you've ever listened to this, like Monroe Boston Strauss was the god of pies as it comes to making pies for commercial and industrial bakeries, and he died sometime in the 70s, and he kind of went into obscurity after World War II, blah, blah, blah. On page 30 of Pie Marches On, Monroe talks about thickening fruit juices with starch and then, quote unquote, inverting the solution by adding sugar. Technically, inversions only happen when one, but listen, he's just using the wrong term. Math Man. He's just not using inversion correctly. He wrote it in the 30s. Give the guy a break. I think what he means is that he thickens it with starch and he adds sugar and then it appears to go clearer and like knocked down. I think that's what he means by invert, but I just don't think he's using it correctly. But I'll look at it. I'll look at it again. Maddie writes in, I thought earlier about this question, but the conversation that you guys had with Leahy and Peter Hoffman sparked a lot of questions. As a baker, I had never heard of falling number. So falling number, remember, is a measure of the enzymatic activity that is in a flour. And the way that they measure it I don't know why we can't measure this on our own. I don't know why somebody doesn't make like a $30 thing instead of a $30,000 thing that can measure falling number. But simply what you do is you take a small test tube that's roughly 200 millimeters long and roughly less than an inch across. And you put 7 grams of flour and I forget how much water, something like 30 grams of water into it. And you heat it in boiling water with a plunger. And for 60 seconds, you heat it and move it around to gelatinize the starch. So as you gelatinize it, the amylase activity is going. It's a very prescribed thing. So it doesn't matter how much damaged starch. I was wrong about that during the thing in terms of getting your falling number because you're gelatinizing the starch. And then you wait to see how long the plunger takes to fall through that test tube a specific distance. And that's what the falling number is, how long it takes for that plunger to fall a specific distance. And again, I don't know why for home bakers, someone won't make something that can give you a falling number because I think that we would be happy if the number was accurate to within, let's say, 6 or 7, 8, 10% even, so that you could get an idea. But nobody does. I looked for hours to try to find someone who would just even give me the dimensions of the plunger used. The test tube I can get the dimensions of, but the plunger I was not able to get the dimensions of. If you had the dimensions of the plunger, you could do your own falling number test. Anyway, that's what we're talking about. And we're talking about the fact that if you have a low falling number, meaning that the plunger falls really fast, it doesn't take that many seconds for the plunger to fall. It's an indication that there's enzymes present, amylase enzymes present in the flour that break down starch, right? And so that is a two-edged sword, right? So you need some amylase enzymes there to break down starch to provide sugar for the yeast to eat to grow. But on the other hand, water is being absorbed vastly more by damaged starch than it is by intact starch, right? So proteins and damaged starch are absorbing a lot of the water in flour, especially in bread flour. And as soon as and enzymes more readily attack damaged starch than they do intact starch. So what happens is that as the yeasts are going and fermenting, because the enzymes are there producing sugar for them, right? You are the enzymes are breaking down that damaged starch, and therefore the dough goes slack because all the water that they're holding gets released as it's being turned into sugar and then getting consumed by the bacteria, right? That makes sense? So I don't know where we're going. So it is true, as you say, Maddie, that a low falling number will also cause faster fermentation, but I don't think that's what's caused. And possibly, depending on what's growing, more acidity, right? And acidity will, at a certain point, destroy the gluten structure and cause it to go more slack. But it's a multimodal thing. I think in my doughs go slack well before they become sour, simply due to the destruction of the starch. Before anyone goes off, thanks, Ariel, for coming on. But I'm going to say this. Here's my thing from last week. I made my freaking stuffed cabbage lasagna, and it was good, so people can it. I made it with, I didn't say that. I meant people can eat it. How about that? Yeah, so like I made it, I had a bunch of vegetarians over, so I had to make it with impossible meat. I took onions, a lot of onions, because I cook with an unconscionable amount of onions. I cooked them down for an hour and 20 minutes on the Breville, on the induction burner, because I can just walk away from it and let it cook for hours and hours until it cools down. I did maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. Then I did some mushrooms, which I then chummed up into my fancy Italian tomatoes. I then browned off like a whole bunch of the impossible meat, added some smoked paprika, added a little bit of this, it's not bad actually, this product I'm about to tell you, better than bouillon, their beef consomme thing, a little bit of that, a little bit of arroz pista, which is like the hot pepper paste from Hungary. Put that all together with the tomatoes, simmered that down, then layered it with the no cook lasagna and sauerkraut that I had let drain for 3 or 4 hours and then pressed out. So just layered that up, no cheese, man, it was money in the bank. Cooked it next to a regular cheese lasagna where I also put some mushrooms into the sauce to give it a little meatiness, and I used a little smoked scamorza along with the mozzarella so that it would have a little bit of that smoky. And people loved it. So people who thought it was going to be a bad idea, you're wrong. One thing I need to do, I need to make it hold together a little better. Anyway, so that's been my week in cooking. Next week we'll talk about John's restaurant cooking issues.